She didn't plan to stop in that dusty town. But the wind shifted and something maybe God himself told her to look closer. And that's when she saw them 3 boys for sale, like cattle. If stories of quiet heroes' second chances and the kind of faith that walks through fire speak to your soul, subscribe now and stay with me. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a Wild West tale. It's a story of grace, where there should have been nothing left but ashes. This is about a nun with nothing left to give, until the day someone whispered her name. It's about boys who had forgotten what it meant to be wanted, until they found a woman who refused to let them be forgotten. And it's about the home they built together, not with blood, but with bread, prayer, and a rifle above the door. Let me tell you what happened. At the edge of the valley, where the wind still carries miracles. She hadn't planned to stop. A Wild West story of faith and found family. She hadn't planned to stop that day. Didn't need bread, didn't need nails, didn't need anything really, not anymore. The prairie wind had shifted, that was all. A sudden gust like a whisper through the veil of her habit. Some folks might call it instinct. But she'd worn the veil too long not to recognize the nudge of the Holy Spirit. And so, Sister Magdalena pulled the reins of her wagon toward the town square. What she saw there made her heart go still. 3 boys, their heads covered with burlap sacks, hands bound behind their backs. A painted sign hung crooked on the post beside them. Orphans, $3 apiece. No names, no ages, no shame. No one in town looked twice, not anymore. Children came and went these days, sold, traded, forgotten. But the nun in black stepped down from her wagon with fire in her step. Her boots struck the dirt like a challenge. Her rosary swung at her side like a weapon holstered by prayer. "Ma'am," the auctioneer said, half laughing, half nervous, "you here to take one?" She didn't answer. The tallest boy, maybe 12, swayed on his feet. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6. No one cried, no one begged. They'd learned better by now. The man scratched his neck and leaned in. "They ain't house-trained. Don't talk, don't cry, haven't eaten since sunrise. Orders from the cellar. Don't untie the sacks till they're bought." Still she said nothing. She reached into her satchel and pulled out 5 silver coins, placed them in his hand. "All 3, she said, her voice calm, final. "Untie them." The burlap fell. The boys blinked into the light, eyes hollow, expressions guarded. But the youngest, his lips cracked, face smudged with dust, looked straight at her and whispered, "Sister Magdalena." She froze. "How do you know my name?" He didn't cry, didn't tremble, just said, "A lady told me, in my sleep. Said you would come. Said you'd take us home." The crowd murmured. A few people crossed themselves, but she didn't flinch. Because she remembered. She remembered kneeling alone, in the dark, months ago, hands folded in silence, whispering into the stillness. "Lord, if I am to live the rest of my days behind these hills, let someone need me. Let someone say my name again." Now a child had. Not by blood, and not by law, but by something higher, by grace. She didn't need to know their names. She didn't need their stories. She only needed to take them home, to offer bread, a blanket, and a place by the fire where no one would ever be sold again. Because in the Wild West, justice didn't always ride in with a badge. Sometimes it arrived in a wagon, driven by a nun. With worn boots, a rifle tucked behind the seat, and enough faith to stand in the gap where no one else would. If you believe that sometimes God doesn't send lightning, He just sends someone who shows up at the right moment, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and stay with me. Because what happens next isn't just a rescue. It's the beginning of something sacred. And if you've ever been saved by a stranger's kindness, or wished you had been, drop a comment below with the word home, and let's talk about what that word truly means. A home with no name on the gate. A Wild West story of faith and found family. The cabin sat quiet at the edge of the valley where pine trees whispered and the creek ran cold all year long. It wasn't much to look at. The shutters hung crooked. The barn leaned like an old man tired of standing. The fields had gone to seed seasons ago. but it stood solid and still, just like the woman who brought them there. Sister Magdalena didn't say much on the ride home. The three boys, Beck Harris and little Milo, sat in the back of the wagon, huddled like shadows. No one asked questions. No one offered comfort. Not yet. Because she knew boys who'd been hurt the worst got scared of kindness when it came too fast. When they arrived, she simply said, "Inside." And they obeyed, quiet as ghosts. The stove still held warmth from the morning. She lit the lamp, filled the kettle, pulled flour and beans from the cupboard. "Sit," she told them. And they did, stiff-backed, wary knees close together. One by one, she asked their names. Milo was the first to speak. Soft. "Milo." Harris answered next. Beck said nothing at first, just stared. But when he finally spoke, it was a name, not a threat. That alone was progress. She cooked in silence, fed them hot cakes off the skillet still sizzling. They ate like wolves, fast, silent, focused. No small talk, no manners, just hunger. When they'd finished, she laid out blankets by the hearth. "You sleep here tonight. Clean clothes are in the chest. If you run, I won't chase you. But I'll leave the lantern on until morning." Then she climbed the stairs, leaving them with their thoughts. That night, none of them slept. Not the nun, not the boys. Because sometimes the first night in a safe place is harder than any night in chains. In the early light, she saw it Milo curled beneath a quilt thumb near his lip like a boy who never learned how to be held. Harris slept stiff, hands folded over his chest like a prayer for escape. Beck sat upright in the corner, knees drawn in, watching the door. He hadn't closed his eyes all night. She didn't wake them with words. She started the fire, poured hot water into a basin, mixed soap. Then she set folded clothes on the bench. "You'll wash in the barn. Beck first, then Harris, then Milo. Don't come back until you're clean." They didn't move at first. "Why are you doing this?" Beck asked, finally, voice low. She met his gaze. "Because I want to. People don't do things just to be kind." "They should," she said, and then turned back to the fire. They went, one by one. Washed, changed, came back quieter, but somehow steadier. Later, Milo asked, "Can I keep my name? Why wouldn't you people change him when they take you in?" She paused. "God gave it to you, didn't he?" He nodded. "Then it stays." That day, the cabin didn't feel empty. It didn't feel haunted. It felt like something else entirely. Like a home. No bloodline, no baptismal record, just grace thick in the air. And the flicker of something sacred, a family beginning to form one quiet promise at a time. Sometimes healing begins in silence, in a warm meal, a safe place to sleep, and someone who doesn't ask questions, just stays. But peace never lasts long in the Wild West. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to follow this journey, because what's coming next will test not just their trust, but her faith itself. And I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever found peace only to feel it slip away just when you needed it most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. The devil don't always knock, a story of faith armed with grace. Peace, folks say, is the softest kind of miracle. And for a while, Sister Magdalena had it. The boys had found a rhythm, chores, bread baking, scripture before sleep. Beck had stopped flinching. Harris had started reading aloud. Milo sang little hymns under his breath, even when he thought no one heard. They called her sister still, but the way they clung to her shawl, the way they leaned in when she read from the good book, said something louder than any word. It wasn't perfect, no. But it was whole. And that was enough. Until the past came riding. It started with a knock. 3 raps, firm, final. She opened the door and found a man in a long black coat, a crooked mustache, and a legal folder tucked under one arm. In the other hand, something far worse, a burlap sack, the kind used when they were first sold. "You must be Sister Magdalena," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I am. I've come for the boys. I have papers." He handed them to her like they were holy writ. Signatures, stamps, legal threats. "Judge Hammond signed this 2 counties over," he added. She didn't flinch. "Hammond retired 5 years ago." The man blinked. Still counts. These boys belong to a buyer. No, she said, voice like steady rain. They belong to God now. Beck stepped behind her fists, clenched. You don't own us, he growled. Boy, I paid money for you, the man hissed. That makes you mine. Harris stepped forward, chin high. Then your receipt's soaked in blood. The man reached for his coat pocket. But Sister Magdalena was faster. The rifle came down from above the door frame, an old Remington her brother had left her years ago. She hadn't fired it in more than a decade. But her hands didn't shake. Try it, she said, the barrel steady. I'm no outlaw. I took a vow of mercy. But mercy doesn't mean letting evil walk through your door. The man froze, scowled, then slowly backed away. You'll regret this. No, she said. You will. When his horse's hooves finally faded, she lowered the gun. The boys were quiet. Milo clutched her skirt. You were going to shoot him, he whispered. She knelt. If he had tried to take what wasn't his, I would have done what was needed. Beck stared at her. You're a nun. Ain't you supposed to pray and forgive? I did pray, she said softly. And what God told me was protect the flock, even if it means standing in the doorway with iron in your hands. That night they sat closer to the fire. No one laughed. No one cried. But no one doubted anymore either. She was theirs, not just their guardian, not just their roof. She was the line between them and the darkness. And her faith, quiet, fierce, and armed if needed, was the reason they still had a home. In the Wild West, people talked about sheriffs and six-shooters. But sometimes justice wore a veil and carried a cross in one pocket and a bullet in the other. She protected them with faith and fire. But healing doesn't end at the trigger. If this moved you, like the video and subscribe to stay with us. Because what comes next is quieter, but just as powerful. Comment hope if you've ever seen something broken and then grow beautiful again. Where the tree grew, a Wild West story of healing and hope. The gun never left its place above the door after that night. But Sister Magdalena prayed a little louder the next morning. Not out of fear, out of gratitude. They were still safe. The man hadn't returned, not yet. But peace wasn't something she took for granted anymore. Not in a world that sold children like livestock and forged papers to make it legal. So she did what faithful people do when fear knocks. She got back to work. Beck patched the back fence. Harris learned to set traps without cruelty. Milo began writing his name over and over again across every scrap of paper he could find. But under the surface, something was still broken. They were safe, yes, but not whole. Not yet. One afternoon, while clearing the edge of the ridge behind the house, Beck found a spot near the ravine. Quiet. Still. Here, he said. For what Sister Magdalena asked. A grave, he said. For the ones who didn't make it. Milo looked up. You mean other boys? Yeah, Beck replied. The ones who didn't get saved. The ones we couldn't help. No one spoke. Not for a while. Then Harris placed a small stone in the dirt. Milo added a crayon drawing folded and tied with twine. Sister Magdalena removed a seedling from a pot she'd been saving. A fragile little tree she'd been unsure would ever survive the soil here. She planted it right in the center of that hollow, pressed her palms into the earth, and whispered a psalm. He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds. They left it unmarked. No names, no plaque, only the tree. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled knee-high, and the fire never slept. Milo cried in his sleep sometimes. Harris would get up and place another log on the flames. Beck sat up most nights with the rifle across his knees. But the house held. The walls stood, and the tree, though buried beneath ice and frost, did not die. It waited. By the time spring broke across the valley, with rivers thawing and grass pushing through the snow like green fire, the boys had changed again. Harris read to Milo now. Beck fixed a broken hinge without being asked. Milo sang when he swept louder than before. One Sunday morning, the sun cracked gold across the horizon, and Milo burst through the door, barefoot mud up his legs. "Sister," he shouted. "The tree." She followed him up the ridge. And there it was. Tiny white blossoms blooming where no bloom should have lasted. delicate, trembling petals, like hallelujahs whispered through soil. Beck touched one with rough fingers. "Told you it'd grow," he said. "No," Harris whispered. "We did." Sister Magdalena didn't speak. She only looked heavenward and smiled through tears. It was more than just a tree. It was proof that what had been buried in pain could rise in beauty, that grace grows slow, but it grows strong. And in a Wild West world that tried to break them, this little family had planted something no one could steal. Not a garden, not a tree, but a home. The tree bloomed not just for them, but for every soul that never got the chance. If you believe in second chances, hit that like, subscribe, and stay with us, because this story isn't done. Comment stay if you've ever longed for a place where no one has to run anymore. The light that stayed on. A Wild West story about stopping the running. The tree was blooming, not just alive, but thriving. Tiny white petals danced in the breeze outside Sister Magdalena's cabin, standing like a sentinel over the place where pain had once been buried. And for the first time in a long time, the boys didn't flinch at shadows. They laughed louder, slept deeper, worked with purpose. The past wasn't gone, but it had been met, named, and planted beneath a tree that reminded them, you lived, you healed, you're still here. One evening, Beck sat on the porch, long legs stretched out, a tin cup in hand. Milo curled beside the old hound dog who snored like thunder. Harris leaned against the porch post, whittling a new carving across this time. Sister Magdalena stepped out, brushing flour from her apron. Supper was almost done. Beck looked at her. "You think we'll always be looking over our shoulders?" She didn't answer right away. The wind stirred the pine trees above that low hush, like the voice of God himself moving through the valley. "No," she said finally, "not always, because one day we stop running." Harris looked up. "How we make a place so safe?" She said, voice calm, but sure that others don't have to run anymore. They were quiet, but it wasn't the fearful silence anymore. It was thoughtful, heavy in the way truth always is. That night, a telegram arrived, delivered by a dust-covered rider with red eyes and a worn saddle. "Ma'am," he said, handing her the crumpled message. Someone said, "If I didn't ride fast, some kids might not live." She read it slowly. 3 boys taken. Auction heading south. Need help? Osei Sani. She didn't have to ask who sent it. She didn't have to think twice. She only said, "Harris, saddle the horses." Beck stood already, lacing his boots. "We're going?" She looked at each of them. "No," she said. "We're answering, because that's what they were now. Not a shelter, not just a home. They were a refuge, a lighthouse for the lost, a place where boys didn't get sold, beaten, or forgotten, but claimed, named, given back their voice. By dawn, they rode out 4 strong, one heart between them. They crossed the ridge and followed the trail. And they didn't ride like victims. They rode like fire. They rode like people who'd been spared for a purpose. They found the boys. They stopped the sale. They broke the crates and lit the tents and ran through the valley like Grace on horseback. They came home with 3 more boys, frightened, silent, shaking, just like they once were. And Sister Magdalena knelt before them, smile gentle beneath her veil. "You don't have to run anymore," she said. "Not here." They stayed, and the house got fuller. The tree grew taller. The porch sagged under the weight of more boots and more stories. But the light never went out. Because when the world said they weren't worth saving, someone said otherwise. Not just with words, but with a home, with supper on the stove, with a cross in one hand and a rifle in the other. And a voice that always said the same thing. "You're mine now, you're safe, and you're stay." This story is a testament to the quiet power of love, faith, and chosen family. In a world that once treated children like property, one woman, guided not by law, but by divine conviction, chose to stand in the gap. Through Sister Magdalena, we see that family is not born of blood, but of sacrifice, compassion, and the courage to stay when others walk away. Her home became a sanctuary not just from violence, but from shame and abandonment. The boys weren't just rescued, they were restored. And in their healing, we're reminded of God's message. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. John 14:18. The story calls us to be that promise for others, to be the ones who open the door, who leave the light on, and who say with action, you are seen, you are loved, and you are not alone. And if this story touched you, don't go far. Because in the next chapter, a stranger arrives at the gate, and not everyone inside is ready to trust again. Click on the next video to see what happens when the past knocks twice.